Please open again to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. And as we've come to this place in the Exodus, and as we now examine the Decalogue, as we examine these 10 words, these 10 commandments, there are going to be several weeks of introduction and overview, because it is critical that we understand what the 10 commandments are, that we understand where the 10 commandments fit, not just within the context of Exodus, but within the context of redemptive history as a whole. Where do they fit for us, and what do they mean to us and to all men? There is a structure here that is helpful. There is a pattern here that helps us bring together the Decalogue as one whole. So with that in mind, let's look at the first table and the second table of the law. Let's look at the way these things work together as a whole, and let's look at their implications for us. First, let's look at the first table and our duty to God. That's those first 4 commandments. And these first 4 commandments really lay a foundation for our worship. When you talk about our duty to God, ultimately, you're talking about our worship of God. Okay? Look at the first commandment. The first commandment, verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. The first commandment, very short and sweet. But this clarifies the object of our worship. We worship God, and we worship God alone. If you look at those first couple of verses leading up to it, look at chapter 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So the foundation, the moral foundation for the moral law is God himself. This is why God is able to give the Decalogue, because he's God. And that's why he starts there. He says, God spoke these words with his own mouth, saying, I am the Lord your God. There you have it. Here is why God gets to give us the Decalogue. Here is why God gets to give us the 10 commandments. Because he is God. Period. End of discussion. This is why they're forever binding and unchangeable. God is God. And the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. This means that God alone is God. That God is our God. Therefore, because of this, we must worship God alone. This means a couple of things, or several things. First, obviously, monotheism. Obviously, it means monotheism. This is extremely important for Israel coming out of Egypt. We've alluded to this before, but let me put a finer point on it. When Israel comes out of Egypt, and when the plagues come, God did not need the first 9 plagues to get Pharaoh ready for plague number 10. God made Pharaoh. God is sovereign over Pharaoh. God did not need the first 9 plagues in order to soften him up. He could have just done it all in one shot. Could have done it all without a word. Could have done it without Moses. Could have done it, it could have just been done. Pharaoh could have just woken up one day and said, hey, you guys go. But God did not operate that way. Why the first 9 plagues? Well, there are several reasons, not the least of which is that God obliterates every possibility of the gods of Egypt being actual gods. He obliterates that. He stands in direct opposition to everything that the Egyptians worship, which in turn would have been everything that Israel was tempted to worship. That's why you see those 9 plagues. They weren't just for the Egyptians. That was for the Israelites. Because remember, he's not just getting Israel out of Egypt, he's getting Egypt out of Israel. God is shaping his people Israel, but not only is he shaping his people Israel, but in doing so, he is also giving us a picture of how he shapes his covenant people in general. We have seen every step of the way how what is happening in the life of Israel mirrors what is happening in the life of the covenant people of God today. And the whole point being, we are not as distinct from the people of Israel as we often think we are. We know, for example, in Romans that we have been grafted in to that vine. We know from Galatians that we are the Israel of God. And we understand that all of those promises that have been made to Abraham and to his descendants are ours because of our spiritual connection to him by faith. We get this and we see this. And so this point is important. Listen to this from Walton, Matthews, and Chavalas. When the text says that there should be no other gods before me, it does not refer to others having a higher position than Yahweh. And that's important because you could sort of read it like that. You shall not have any other gods before me. You can have some after me, but you can't have any. No, not at all. The introduction in verse 2 has already indicated as a pre-existing assumption that Yahweh is their God. The phrase before me means in my presence, and therefore prohibits other gods from being considered to be in the presence of Yahweh. In other words, it's like, don't bring that before me. Don't bring that in front of me, is what God is saying here. Not ranking in order of importance, but you shall have no other gods. I will not tolerate that. So monotheism. Secondly, worship. Calvin states, in his commandment, God enjoins that he alone should be worshiped and requires a worship free from all superstition. God requires that he be worshiped. In essence, when you boil it down, worship is our acknowledgement that God is our God, that he is the one true God. We give our worship to God and to God alone. Thirdly, obedience. Obedience is assumed here. After all, what does it mean for God to be our God if it doesn't mean that he rules and reigns? Amen? So God is to be obeyed. This is important as God is giving these commandments, because this first commandment becomes sort of an umbrella over the rest of the commandments. Because I'm God, I am the one who determines what is true, what is right, what is holy. So truth, beauty, and goodness come to us from God himself. We are not a law unto ourselves. We do not get to determine what is true, what is right, or even what is beautiful. God is the one who determines this, because God is God.